there are two main emotions that will ruin your life, and they're the strongest ones that we feel usually. The two are sadness and anger. The problem with those two is that they typically is because an event happened. It's not usually something which we are born feeling and stuff like that, but it's either a train of thought, it's a perception that we had over things, or it's the fact that somebody did something and we have trouble actually processing it. There's a cost though to not processing emotions. It's a concept that's been talked about before, but it's something that has to be reestablished, something that we have to take into account again and realize is because untreated sadness will actually end up making you hateful, and untreated, unprocessed anger will make you bitter. And those two will be attitudes that we take with us towards life. They will become things which become part of who we are as a subconscious, and then fuel us forward, right? You probably know a lot of people, at least have dealt with people who seem to be grateful about life, and they seem to just come to life in a way which is constructive, and they always seem to smile and add to people's lives, and be constructive in their comments, and never do you doubt their intentions. And that's because that's who they become. They become that there is a certain state in which, or an emotion area, we could say, a region of the emotional realm which they are from. That's who they are, and that's the energy they exude. Other people though that you might know is the other side of the spectrum, is people who every time you go around them, they're miserable, and they seem to always be complaining about stuff, and they never can allow for something great to happen around, because they associate it to something which is to be able to bring it down as less of than what it actually is. And let's go and that represents the other side of the spectrum, something which is really destructive. Where I'm going with this is to say that it's important for us to realize that it could be something as a breakup, it could be something as a fight we had with a friend, or a fight we had somewhere in the street, or a point where we felt humiliated. But even though we might have lost certain things, even though we might have we feel like we lost a promotion, we lost an opportunity, we failed at overcoming something, or getting the results that we wanted, for us to take that and to start processing, for even to neglect it as being, oh well, it's just life. It's never just that. Nothing actually just gets dropped without the attention that it requires. And so there are things that we can do about this. Is that there's two cases, or three, we could say. Well, the first case is that this hasn't come yet in your life, and you have balance in yourself. And so in that case, it's to be aware that, okay, I don't suffer from this, but now it's to be aware of it moving forward. Is that there will be a time when we are tested, when who we are is tested by events, by things, and it happens sometimes on a day-to-day basis. But to understand that and to have a clarity as to who we are will allow us to not lose that, to become something different, right? Because this whole thing comes down to who we are. That's the whole game which is happening, is to be able to remain still in who we are, and to not allow things to change us. The second case is for us to actually already be dealing with an emotional problem, an emotional content, like something which makes us really sad when we think about it, something which makes us really mad or angry when we review it a lot. And in both those cases, now that's great. You're in the middle of the fight, and in that moment, it's important to continue in that way. It's important to actually move forward in a manner which will allow you to not fail that, to actually be able to move forward and get the right outcome out of that, and to realize that there is an outcome. It's not just, emotions aren't just for nothing. It's a system which is part of us, and it's necessary. Between our thoughts, our emotion, our actions, emotions come in the middle of it, and it what makes people move. People do crazy things for emotional reasons. Like, just think about relationships. Just think about what people do for love, what people do for feeling disrespect or embarrassed, right? And so if you understand that, then it's important to stay in that and to not just push it aside and allow for emotions to be whatever and to give up on them. Because in reality, what you would be doing is giving up on yourself. Because if that becomes untreated, if you don't actually go through the process of really going through the whole thing by being present with yourself and where you need yourself most, what will happen is that something will happen and you'll be swayed from who you are, and you would have caved away pretty much. You would have ducked the fight. You would have you tapped out pretty much. You tapped out, and that's a problematic, because sadness and anger and those strong emotions, I'm just using those two as the biggest example. It can be grief, it can be all of that, but those are the two strongest ones. Is that will become who you are, right? The person who is miserable and that we spoke to about earlier is that way because something happened. There is a state of mind they're in, and we come to these conclusions in thoughts. We come to conclusions in thoughts. We conclude that, okay, well, the world must be like this then. It means that, maybe all women are like this, maybe all men are like this, maybe friendships don't exist, and maybe money doesn't actually make me happy, or is not actually worth it, and whatever. All of those different thoughts will become emotions that you talk yourself in. They will become states of mind and energy which you end up giving to people, and that's a problem. It kind of goes like this: is that if I'm no longer aware of the feeling of sadness, if I can no longer feel it as being just present there within myself, and I can't just sit and watch it, then I know that there's a problem, because then it must mean that I must have become that. I must have become that energy. And because sadness is a lot like rain or like water, right? It has to be there. Like, it's every environment needs it to an extent. There is an extent of water which is necessary for life to be for life to exist around us, a level of its presence. And so when it no longer is, right, when it no longer when you can no longer be aware of it to any extent within you, when you feel numb, right? This feeling of numb is something which we talk about a lot. At that moment, that's a red flag. And what has actually happened, it's not just that the sadness disappeared, is that you've become that. You become desensitized to it, which is worse than actually feeling the sadness, because to feel the sadness is to actually be alive. It's part of life. It's to realize that, it's not a bad or a good thing. It's just, it has to be. There's a reason why we feel it, but we just have, it's a part of the game which we have to accept. And the same goes with anger, right? You can see it a lot, and a lot of times it's going to be people of older age. I've rarely seen it in people which are younger, but a lot of times we can see as people go into adulthood and they stop chasing certain things and they stop pursuing certain aspects or aspirations and parts of who they are, who they saw themselves as. They end up creating a bitterness, and that bitterness, and what's realized is that bitterness becomes to everyone. It's free for all. It's for everyone. They're bitter towards every person, and that's because it's actually a worldview which they developed. And if you understand that concept, and you understand that part of the game, that it's important for you to be aware of the emotion, to not lose sight of it, and that at that moment when you do become numb, you are actually the one who became victim to it, that it never disappears. Well, from there you can start to take certain actions. You can start to be proactive towards that, and you can take decisions which will allow you to not move through life self-sabotaging. Will allow you to move through life not talking yourself out of opportunities. It will develop in you a bigger self-esteem, because you don't see yourself as this sad thing just walking around. You see yourself as somebody who's worth all the different things which they want. right? You see yourself as somebody of value because you have actually applied value to yourself and who you are. You actually defend your character. You actually defend who your perspective about life, the authentic perspective, the one which doesn't require you to force any type of behavior. And at that moment, you can actually move forward in life and be so much more comfortable, right? The third case is the case where, let's say you realize that you are part of that. You are part of the group that is already in a state of being bitter, and you have the self-awareness to realize that you are numb and that you struggle with these things. Well, at that moment, now it's a different thing, but it doesn't mean that there is no hope. It means that it takes a different plan of action, and it starts the same way, right? To be proactive in that manner, it will come down to the same thing in both, right? But the solution remains to develop more stillness in your life. To the outcome that you're looking for will be more clarity, and what you want to do is to have a better relationship with yourself. And to now, what you're trying to do, if you find yourself already bitter or numb, is to now you're trying to recover, right? You're trying to recover who is it that you are. You're trying to find your perspective in life, which you used to have and you no longer seem to find within yourself. And both of these can be developed in the same way. If you're already dealing with an emotion, you can write. Write is a great one, because through writing, it's like knots. You take knots and you open the different knots, then you realize that it's just a string. Clarity is the same thing. You just go through the process. You stay present with yourself. And that's why things like drugs, things like too much distraction, things like different addictions that we have will sway us away from it, because they actually become a problem. They become problematic towards progress, towards finding clarity, because now you're confusing yourself, you're distracting yourself, you're trying to avoid clarity because you're trying to avoid who you are and yourself. And that's a big deal, right? When you're trying to work towards recovery, towards undoing the damage which you did, it comes down to the same thing, right? It's to be present with yourself, and it's to be aware. It starts with awareness, right? And you're trying to, in both ways, in both, as you're going through it, or as if you already made some mistakes, is to stay present and aim to understand yourself and who you are. And as you start to do that, because I'm saying all this because there are times in my life when I applied these exact things and they work. And if you're able to just sit and be aware, awareness will actually be able to allow clarity in your life, and you can retrack the steps which brought you to this place. And emotions, since they're linked with thoughts, right? And they're linked with your perspective about events or things or life, will start to heal by themselves. And you heal through creating that feeling of clarity, that feeling of stillness, and finding that worldview which is original to yourself. And yeah, that's, I hope that makes sense. I hope I was able to be clear, concise. But it comes down to this: is that if you do not process emotions such as sadness, you will become hateful towards life, and it won't allow you to create relationships the way that you would want, and you won't understand why, and you won't understand why you feel numb. And if you're not able to create to process anger in your life, or things that anger you that happen through life, you will become bitter, and in that moment you won't be able to enjoy things around you, and you won't understand why is it that you can't allow yourself to feel good about certain things. And it's because that became who you are. You might become bitterful towards people too, people that actually mean well for you, but because of the anger that you had because of past experiences, now you can't even experience love, you can't even experience all these things. So I'm just saying, do not let your life go to waste for a small amount of discomfort, or a small amount of facing who it is that you are, because it's really just facing truth. And all this, this is a big deal. And you might turn around. If we can see other people that are 60, 70, come 50 years old, bitter, and going through these things, is because it just goes to show that you might make a mistake at an early point in your might take some actions at a point in your life, and then find yourself having spent your whole life lifting that weight just because you didn't want to process it, and you in the end just didn't want to be there for yourself. And at that moment you realize it is your fault, because you gave up on you, and you didn't think that you deserved that work. Really, that's all it means. And the work means awareness, understanding, acceptance, and then change will occur.